so welcome everyone. And maybe for those of you who don't know Venerable, I'll just give a quick introduction. So Venerable George I've known Venerable George for, well, our paths have crossed quite a few times, but I took a class with him. The first time I met him was 2001 maybe, or maybe 4. You were at LMB, Land of Medicine Buddha. Anyway, I was taking a basic program class. I can't remember which one it was, but in any case, he is one of our earliest students of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa. And he's one of our most senior monks actually in the FPMT. So it's a great honor to have him. And he's done many things, but he's been SPC at various centers. He's been resident teacher at various centers. He's a great translator. So if you read the Heart Sutra translation, for example, it's Venerable George who translated it in the FPMT version, that is. And he is a great teacher and a meditator. So last time I saw him was right before he was getting started on a 3-year retreat. This was about 5 years ago, maybe something like that. So we are very fortunate to have him. He is a wonderful teacher. So thank you, Venerable, for joining us on Sunday mornings, and hopefully, well, we'll see. So the news is that Geshe is in Nepal at his father's village, and it's not clear how good his internet connection is. He's trying to find a better connection, but if he's not, and you may know that Kathmandu is totally, they're locked down. And so we want Geshe to be safe. So we suggested that Geshe stay where he is, and if he can get a good internet connection, he will do the teachings that he does on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights. But if not, then Sunday mornings, Venerable George has kindly accepted substituting for him, but I'll find out in the next few days, hopefully. Okay. Thank you, Venerable. So should I get started with the prayers? It's up.
Yes, I'd already greeted people.
Okay.
It's good to see you all, and there's going to be some sort of Buddhist traditional prayer and offering first of all. So I'll leave it off to Shankar.
Okay, hang on. Okay. So I'm the Umze Geshe. It's Venerable, is that right?
Yes, you're
okay.
The chant. Umze means chant leader.
Okay. So we'll just do this one in English. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Saji Poki Jukshing Medo Tramrira Plingji Nidegan Padi Sangye Jing Mikte Uwa Oh, holy, perfect love, pure love from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru
Hey.
That's it.
Okay, excellent. So.
Oh, let me stop sharing.
Yeah, there we go. I can see everyone now. So Good morning, everyone. Nice to see a lot of you. Some of you are probably conserving your bandwidth by not having your photo up there or your picture. I see a couple extra new people there. Larry, where are you, Larry? Larry Heath. Oh, maybe the mute button is too far away. I was just wondering where you were.
I was muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm in Delaware.
And Delaware. Okay, so we have someone from England and Delaware, and Jean is in Illinois. Judy and Rick are in Wisconsin, and a couple other people. So today, the topic is going to be how to be happy when you're not, which is, I think Lama Yeshe kind of coined that kind of phrase, and Venerable Thupten Trijang, one of our great FPMT teachers, female teachers, also, I think she titled a book by that, but I like that name. I think it's very much in accordance with the idea of Buddhism, especially Mahayana Buddhism. But before we begin, let's spend a couple of minutes doing a little meditation just to calm our minds. And so sit comfortably and spine erect, your eyes not completely open, not completely closed. Ideally, one of the postures, so-called postures, is to just keeping your eyes partially open, look down the side of your nose toward the tip of your nose. That may seem uncomfortable at first, but if you do meditation for a long time, it helps to eliminate some of the scattering of the mind. So just relax your body, relax your mind in the sense of recalling there's nothing else I have to think about right now. And place your attention on watching the breathing, being mindful of your respiration, knowing that you're breathing in, that it's just changing directions, it's going out, just changing directions, coming in, to the exclusion of every other thought. Deprive those other thoughts from their sustenance, which is your attention. Just watch the breathing and count, if you can, mentally. Don't try to multitask, thinking of other things at the same time. Let go of other trains of thought. If you're driving, of course, if you're listening to this in your car, you have to pay attention to the road. And if you're walking, watch your footsteps. But if you're sitting down, this is your one object of observation. Don't control your breathing. Just watch it. Let it become natural, and hopefully, if you're relaxing, slowing down a bit, your mind becoming more concentrated. Now, with a little bit of concentration and relaxation, bring your attention away from the breathing to your mental consciousness, which is to say, not your eye, ear, nose, taste, or tongue, or body consciousness, but that consciousness within which we think, we remember, we plan, we judge. That faculty of our consciousness that develops good qualities like love and compassion and patience and empathy, and within which we fall prey to anger, attachment, unhappiness. Like a turtle or tortoise withdrawing its limbs, its arms and legs and head into its shell, imagine bringing your attention away from the 5 outer senses into the heart, into your mental consciousness, just all your attention there. All of the things you might think about are just, in a sense, images, even though they might be verbal or it's some other kind of form. We call them mental constructs, thoughts. They are arising out of the clarity of our mind, which is naturally pure, naturally clear and unobstructing. If we don't sustain the thoughts by paying attention to them, they will naturally dissipate, become less intense, less obvious. So here, instead of focusing on the object thoughts, the objective thoughts in your mind, like clouds in the sky, focus instead on the space between the thoughts, the space around the thoughts. And even if the thoughts are tenaciously clinging, the space within which those thoughts are emerging. The sense of your body, the presence of your body, is a thought to your mental consciousness. Just let go of that. Try to sense the spaciousness of the mind, the clear light nature of the mind within which that appearance is emerging. Your sense of self, identity as the meditator, that is appearing to your mental consciousness also. Let go of that. So within this state of relative calm, make a motivation, as we did with the prayer before, that I'm going to participate, listen and participate in this talk in order to reach my highest potential, to eventually become an enlightened being for the sake of all sentient beings, all living beings. Okay. Bring your attention back to the present. Open your eyes. Relax. So, does anyone have an observation or a question about meditation, that meditation, before we begin? Dawn looks like she's thinking. Huh? Okay. I can see you all, unless you have your camera off.
Oh. George, I have a question.
Yes. Who's speaking?
This is Dawn.
Oh, hi, Dawn. Yeah, right.
Maybe my question isn't fully formed, but you know, it's in this process, the gross thoughts that are loud are easy to hear, and the ability to let go of those louder thoughts is coming easier. Now, the more subtle thoughts that are happening underneath, is it just a matter of continuing to meditate to find those more subtle ones that are still going on? That
Right. Yeah, good question. So it's a cumulative, what we say, iterative process. When you start letting go of the gross thoughts that are so obvious, when your mind becomes more calm and clear, you'll start to be able to notice these other thoughts that are constantly there. Like some examples I gave in that little session there, the sense of your body being present, sort of looming there irrefutably. When you're sort of on the level of paying attention to your gross senses, your body, the pains in your body, and the odors, maybe nice incense in your room, or some, sounds outside, someone's leaf blower is going on. When you're focusing on those, you don't notice the more subtle ones, like during the day when the sun is shining. Although there are stars in the sky that if it was an eclipse, for instance, you would be able to see the starlight, individual stars. When the sun is blasting there, you don't notice these other more subtle lights. So it's a little bit like that. Just let go of all the suns and moons of these gross thoughts, and then you'll be able to notice the star-like, more subtle thoughts, and then learning to let go of those also. So even when something is present and you do notice it and you don't know a way to let go of it, just to recognize that there is spaciousness there. Otherwise, the thought couldn't be present. Like example that's given in the teachings. If I were to ask you, is there any space where a big boulder is located? Space meaning the absence of obstructive contact, which is what sort of technically we mean by space. So you might say, oh no, there's no space there because the rock is obstructing, so there's no space there. But if you recognize the rock, the boulder couldn't be there unless it was occupying space, unless there was space there for it to be. If there was no space, you couldn't move the boulder into that location. So knowing that, and that analogy, recognize even these star-like thoughts that you begin to notice, just use that logic and think, there is space there, of the mind, spaciousness of the mind, and defocus on the objective thought, refocus on the subjective mind. It's almost like turning your back away from someone who's in your face, to say, who's watching this? What is the mind? What's the nature of the mind that is observing this thought? So it's a good project. Is this kind of meditation is what is renowned in India and Buddhism as the Great Seal, the Mahamudra, trying to recognize the nature of the mind. This is what we're looking at is the conventional nature of the mind, not its ultimate nature, but very, very useful project to continue. Okay, is that helpful?
Thank you, Venerable George. Yes, thank you.
Anyone else have an observation about the meditation? Those of you who like to pursue that, the breathing meditation, first of all, watch the strength of the respiration. Even when you're relaxed, it'll be probably much calmer and more regular than in your ordinary everyday activities. But then when you go to the more subtle object of your mental consciousness, if you watch, at the end of that, you watch the texture or the quality of the breathing, it's even more calm and subtle and, becoming very, very reduced. Generally, that's a sign that the mind is becoming calmer. So, yeah. So in terms of how to be happy when you're not, what's the sense of that? When you're not happy means when you're preoccupied, when you are obviously unhappy, like depressed, or if you've just been stung by that rascally hornet or that bee or whatever, or mosquito. When your baby has left you, that's my phrase for when you have some loss that you can't account for, you're depressed about. It's quite, what I joke is kind of like the quintessential meaning of all blues music. My baby done left me. I don't know. Is that actually a lyric? I think there's something. My baby done left me. I think I remember Elvis or someone singing something like that. When you are, your mind is agitated because of the political situation or the climate or the racism or the, whatever, economics, you lose your sense of calm, your mind becomes distraught, and you can be unhappy. It can be gross unhappiness, like Dawn was referring to, the gross objects in your mind, or even when we can forget about that, you don't listen to the news for a couple of days, or when some of those are resolved, there could be more subtle senses of unease. So how can we overcome that? Well, one way is to begin to do some meditation. Bring your attention inward, away from the outer circumstances. The example I gave of like a turtle or a tortoise withdrawing its limbs within the shell. Take your attention away from the outer stimuli, and then within the mind, from the inner stimuli of the, unhappy thoughts and so forth, and just abide in that for a while. That doesn't get rid of the outer circumstances, just doing that for 3 months, or, a so-called Vipassana retreat for a week or something. When you arise from that, the bills are still on the table. You still have to, the situation is still there. but that is a beginning to begin to a stance from which you can begin to find some calm and happiness, not just a lack of suffering, sort of like a, like a blasé, neutral state, like just having, mundane food and not being anything stimulating or something like that, actually developing happiness within that. So what are some of one of the ways to think, once you've begun to calm the mind a little bit, is to try to enhance one's satisfaction and peace of mind. So one of the greatest deficits that we have, greatest problems that we have, is a lack of satisfaction. My friends are not good enough. I don't have enough friends. Various kinds of things. My food is not good enough. My lodging is not good enough. One of the greatest obstacles to doing meditation and to being happy is dissatisfaction. How can we be satisfied? It's the same question: how to be happy when you're not? How to be satisfied when you start from a state of dissatisfaction? Is to recognize, for one thing, that we are in what the Buddha called cyclic existence. He didn't say cyclic existence, that's English, right? He said we are in samsara, which is an Indian word, generally Sanskrit. Do you know, Shanka, in modern Hindi is same? Do they say samsara, or is it pronounced a little bit differently in modern Hindi?
No, it's still samsara. In Bengali is shankshar, for example. But yes.
Oh, almost like Shanka. Okay, Shanksha. Okay, so joking. So samsara is not a place, that you want to escape from. You escape from your lonely little apartment and go to some resort in Bali or someplace. Samsara is the state of being continually impelled by our past states of mind, our delusions, in creating actions that will have, that will bring about some consequence to us in the future. It's what we call cyclic existence. In one gross sense, it means continually taking rebirth after we die into another life, and then after that life is finished, into another life. But even in our everyday circumstances, we go through cycles like that. We meet new people, they become friends, we become attached, maybe we have arguments, we split, we leave them, they leave us. So it's the very nature of having a mind that's still contaminated by ignorance and by all of the disturbing mental states that arise from it: anger, attachment, expectation, jealousy, pride, low self-esteem. All of these arise from ignorance while we're still in cyclic existence, while we're still in samsara. That's the very nature of things. So not to be surprised, while we're in cyclic existence, it's the very nature of being in cyclic existence. It's a little bit like that. I think I've seen an advertisement commercial on TV for one of these stock companies, where they're telling you, don't get angry, get even, or something like that. Do you know the one I'm talking about? So like when you see other people that have more money than you, don't get angry, get even. So do something about it. So in this sense, we're not talking about that. We're talking about how to get out of that is what should impel you to practice the spiritual path, to start to develop a sense of empathy for others, a sense, well, first of all, a sense of satisfaction, first of all, realizing this is how it is. There's no place you can go where there are not going to be problems. Even if you go on vacation, you'll have argument with the pool attendant, or the sheets were not right in your room, or it costs too much or something. You can relax a little because you've gone away from the gross sun, meaning the sun in the sky, sun-like problems in your everyday life, but the inner ones are continually there. So that, I think, is great advice. While you're in cyclic existence, which is all of our time now, just being in meditation is not a state of nirvana, is not a state in which you're free from those sufferings. But while we're in cyclic existence, it's the very nature of life to be suffering. It's like a fire. If you were to stick your hand in a fire and be surprised that your hand is getting burned and getting angry about it, is nonsensical, because it's the very nature of fire. So if we can't get out of cyclic existence right now, but what we can do is start to extricate ourselves from situations, activities that instigate our suffering. Like, don't put your hand in fire. Don't drink. I drink water and tea and stuff. So don't drink alcohol, or start to reduce the intake, if you will. Don't smoke cigarettes, of course. Don't smoke dope, or don't snort cocaine. Don't drop pills. They are like entering into the fire. There's always going to be some, there'll be some initial kind of, apparent happiness, but the long-term effects is like putting your hand in fire. When your hand is cold and you put your hand in the fire, for a couple of instants, it feels, oh, the hand is not so cold. The suffering of the cold goes down, but the suffering of the heat immediately goes up, right? So remove yourself from the company of disturbing individuals. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have compassion for them, but if you find that a group of people that you spend time with, you go to the tavern, or you go on, you have activities with them that are disturbing for your mind, that are argumentative and so forth, reduce your reliance upon spending time with them. Find a certain amount of contentment. In fact, in the Buddhist teachings, when we talk about the requisites for doing retreat, for meditation, one of the things is to find yourself an isolated place away from disturbing individuals and the clamor of everyday life. So even though you may not have any place to go to like that, you can retreat to the cave of your mind, your heart. In Buddhism, we say the heart chakra, at the center of your chest, not the beating heart, but where some sense of a fundamental, subtlemost mind resides. Like this meditation, bringing your attention away from the senses to your mental consciousness, and be satisfied there. Sometimes people talk about, what was it that I wasn't raised Catholic. There was a church on the corner, the Presbyterian church, that my parents sent me to on Sunday mornings, my brother and I, because it was there and they could sleep in then without the boys running around. So, but I know Catholic friends who talk about the Catholic nuns or monks that might teach at Catholic school were so severe, as though like they didn't want you to have any fun, it's like If you were to do just the breathing meditation, you might think it's like that, like they're not letting me have any fun. I'm not having a chance to fantasize about new boyfriends or girlfriends, or fantasize about all of these different things that might bring your mind some pleasure, apparent pleasure. But that state of sort of asceticism, can you get the idea of what I mean by asceticism? Asceticism, kadrup in Tibetan. Ka means difficult, drup means achieving or persevering through what is difficult. That has a great deal to teach us. Just watching and seeing that if you don't pay attention to the disturbing thoughts, the anger, your unhappiness, your resentment, and so forth, if you don't pay attention to them, you take your attention away from them, they begin to diminish, and you can find a state of calm, which, with regard to our ordinary chaotic life, will already be a kind of happiness. How to be happy when you're not, just take your attention away from them. Of course, as I said before, that doesn't solve the problem. The bills are still on the table when you arise from that. Your neighbor is still angry with you, you still owe money on the car or whatever. So you have to do something about it. But within that state of calm that you've engendered in meditation, you're more able, and also recognizing from a spiritual point of view, Buddhist concepts of karma, that the actions we create bring about our future experience within cyclic existence, our happiness or suffering. You can, with those kind of rules, you can try to deal with the outer problems that earlier you responded to with anger, resentment, pride, jealousy. Recognizing those states of mind as kind of our enemies. Don't rely upon them. When they start to occur, even though you might not have within your mental arsenal, your spiritual arsenal, you may not have an antidote to them immediately. First of all, just withdrawing away from them, letting your mind calm down. And then when you arise from that, you're more able to deal with them. So, for instance, anger, resentment. One of our biggest problems, besides starting with, that brings about disenchantment, or what do you say, dissatisfaction, and dissatisfaction causes anger. So what is anger, basically? Is it something that's good? Okay, I saw Deborah blink, so I wasn't sure that was just a photograph of her. Deborah, what do you think? Is there any good to anger? You have to unmute. You have to, there you go.
Not really, but I'm doubting. So maybe sometimes anger in certain situations or circumstances could be a good thing. I don't think there can be an extreme.
What was the last phrase?
But I don't think it could be extreme.
Yeah, right. Okay, so a little bit of anger might be good, right? So these are important issues to think about. These states of mind, like anger, attachment. You might think attachment is good because it helps to motivate you to get what you want, to get that pleasure, to get that Mars bar or whatever it is. You're go out of your way to find the most attractive, interesting partner or something. Anger is a state of mind which, having observed something which has which has caused you some discomfort, or we could say suffering. You know, you've heard harsh words, someone has scolded you, you know, your car won't start. And so the dissatisfaction and unhappiness rises. Having observed something which is unhappy, that causes unhappiness in the mind, one tries to think about what the cause of that is. It's the other person who said these words to me, or who has slapped me, or who has left me when I needed their companionship or their help, or has done something, they've taken my money or whatever. So as a result of that, focusing on some source of what one imagines the source of the discomfort is, blaming them and, you know, riling oneself out as though the way to eliminate the discomfort is to, you know, eliminate the other person, or to put them in their place, to say sharp words, or to beat them, or, you know, deprive them of an opportunity to continue to harm you like that. Generally, the Dalai Lama says that anger, we say generally, is always a negative state of mind. It creates problems for us. It deprives us of the clarity of our mind. It's almost never of help. Now, you might say, some people might say, if you don't get angry at the assailant, someone's trying to steal your money on the street, or the cab driver is trying to, you know, you give them a $100 bill for a ride, and you expect change back, and they pretend it was a $10 bill or something like that. Unless you get angry with them, you get cheated. You know, you think of anger as your protector. But there's a big difference. So when we say that we should try to eliminate anger, it doesn't mean that you eliminate being straightforward and how to say, self-assertive. For instance, you can still say, without getting angry, that no, I gave you a $100 bill, and so forth. You can stand up for yourself without getting angry. There's you know, maybe even defend yourself, you know, if need be. But when the demarcation between being, I'm trying to find the right word, sort of steadfast and, you know, assertive is not the right word, but, you know, the difference between that and getting angry is when the mind becomes unclear and uncontrolled, and you act in ways that you may regret later. A long-term relationship that you've cultivated for years or, you know, decades, simply by saying some sharp words to the other individual in a moment of unhappiness can kind of sever that kind of sense of trust and love and, you know, reliance that you've cultivated for such a long time. So in the scriptures, it does mention that if there were something that you could get angry about, the only thing would be your own ego. You know, it's the thing, your own selfishness. That's the only thing that is the real cause of your suffering. So when you look at the situation and you think the source of your suffering is out there, instead of that, turn your attention inward and recognize that the real source of your suffering is within your own mind. So what do I mean by that? When I first went to the monastery that I was associated with for, still am, Kopan Monastery, where Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche taught. I remember there was, on the walls, there were these little quotations that were written on paper that, from the teachings to remind people. People would put on their wall to remind themselves. Do you do that? Do we do that? What do we do in the West? Do we have something like that? Sort of like there's a commercial now on TV. I can't remember what it's for. Maybe it's Geico or one. Some old fellow is talking to these people, trying to teach them how to not be like their parents and they grow old. Do you know this one? And this one woman has a little placard that says, live, love, all of these kinds of platitudes that you're. And he said, "Do we really need this?" And they said, the other people he's trying to teach say, "Oh, yes." And he says, "No." And he tosses it in the trash can. Do you know that one? Anyone recognize that? Yes. Okay. Anyway, a little bit like that. There are some kind of spiritual things that we can put up that can remind us. Lama used to say, first look inside, then look outside. So instead of looking for the source of your unhappiness outside, look for it inside, that is within your own mind, your own sense of entitlement, your own sense of pride. They shouldn't treat me this way. Not recognizing that you're in cyclic existence and that it's the nature of cyclic existence to be dissatisfying, unsatisfying. Thinking that you are, by your nature, you're entitled. Things should go better than this. It shouldn't be like this. Recognizing that this is the nature of cyclic existence already takes away some of the blame outside and puts it on your own mind for still being under the influence of your ego, on your delusions and so forth. So some of the great Tibetan practitioners were disciples of a great Indian teacher who came to Tibet. His name was Atisha. Maybe some of you have heard of Atisha. Atisha, his followers were called the Kadampas. Ka in Tibetan means holy speech, honorific for speech. Dampa means someone who is bound by. So the Kadampas were those who were, they held very important the speech of the Buddha and the great teachers of Buddhism. So they were great practitioners, and they had sort of, I think, fourfold method to deal with anger. There are many, many antidotes to anger. But I'll mention a little bit about these. One is to, this first thing that I've mentioned here, rather than putting the blame outside, it's the other person's fault, put the blame on yourself. Unless I had created this, the karma for this situation, there's no way that I could experience it right now. This is what the Kadampas call the arrow and the target. So unless you shot off the arrow in the past, there's no way that it could hit the target. What is the arrow? The karma that you've created in past lives. It's sort of there on our mind stream. The seeds of those actions. Even there's a target up here right now. Unless you shoot the arrow, there's no way the arrow can hit the target. So unless you created the karma in the past, there's no way that you could experience this discomfort. So that helps to take your attention, you're focusing on someone else, some other situation as being the main cause of your discomfort. So, like example, in the airport, and I use this advisedly because I've gotten angry so many times at airports. They tell you it's going to fly at this time, and then at the last minute they say it's changed, or you have to go to another gate, or the kinds of things that can happen at the airport. So at the airport, the flight has been changed. There's some people who, out of indignation, maybe they don't even really need to get there that quickly, but just they're frustrated and they get angry and they see it as a problematic situation. There are other people who say, it's almost like, recognizing that you're in the fire and it's not surprising to get hot. So being at the airport, there are going to be problems like that. So recognizing there's no way that you could experience the situation that you find uncomfortable now unless you created the karma for it in the future. So in analogy to our meditation, when these different thoughts are in your mind and you sustain them, so when we're watching our breathing and watching the nature of the mind, while those thoughts are present, the mind can't be completely calm. In fact, some of them may be, thoughts of unhappiness, why this happened, or this shouldn't be, and so forth. So withdrawing your attention away from them, those thoughts begin to diminish in their intensity, and then their frequency of what, even though you diminish something, they can arise again a couple of minutes later, or when you turn your mind to them. The frequency in which they arise can also start to diminish as you take your attention, your either fascination with something that's attractive or your sense of unease with that which is problematic. Those states of mind can begin to diminish, and you can start to get rid of the stars in the sky of your mind. So here, the strategy is a little bit the same. These antidotes to anger, first of all, take your attention away from the wrong way of thinking, that the problem is outside. And it allows your mind to be calm. And within that calmness, you can start to understand better the situation, and you can apply yourself in a more skillful way. Another instigating factor of anger is a lack of empathy for others, a lack of compassion. So you might feel that it's the other person deserves to be slapped or deserves those harsh words. I remember coming back to the States after many years in India and Asia, and there was a kind of phrase on the TV programs that's something like when a person got angry with someone else and another person was present watching it, they said, "Why did you get so angry? What do you?" And the phrase that was used is, "They needed that." Have you ever heard? Is that something that's familiar with you? Like, no, Charlene, you have a good heart. So she's saying no. I can't imagine anyone saying that. What's another way that's sometimes phrased? Anyone know what I'm talking about? You
deserve that.
They deserve that. Yeah, they deserve that.
Or they're looking for a beating.
Yeah, exactly.
They had it coming.
Ah, there we go. They had it coming. Yes, exactly. Thank you. Now we're getting more. Yeah. So rationalizing one's anger. So that the thought, this stems from the state of mind, the misperception that other individuals are worthy to be abused. There's nothing wrong with that if they deserve it, right? So the antidote to that is a sense of empathy and compassion for others. Recognizing that just as if we make an error, the classic example I always think of is like you spilled black coffee on your your grandmother's precious carpet, or you broke their Ming vase or something like this, and you're completely distraught and afraid the wrath is going to come down on you. And instead of that, what we would like to think is that they would say, oh, that's okay. It doesn't matter. I can have it cleaned. I can get another one. We would always, if we make mistakes, what we would hope for is to be forgiven, to be loved, not just forgiven, to say, it doesn't matter. Oh, isn't that something that we would hope for? We've burned we brought something to someone and we're cooking it for them, and then we burn it, and or they've asked us to do something, we do it wrong. They'd like to say, it doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. We would like to be loved. We would like to be forgiven, of course, but even beyond that, everything okay. That's what we would like. Everyone else is the same. Instead of thinking others are deserving to be punished, or they deserve that, they're worthy of being abused, think they are not. Meditate on that. That's part of your arsenal in learning to be happy. Meditating on the antidotes, recognizing that just as we want to be happy and to be free of suffering, others are exactly the same. Wouldn't it be great if we could be forgiving and loving like that and not strike out at others out of a sense of empathy and compassion for them? They don't deserve to be suffering. They don't deserve to be abused or to suffer the wrath of our anger in whatever other way we might get it. Cut them off from their allowance or their inheritance or whatever if they've done something to displease you. So this is another way of depriving anger of its sustaining energy. One might think that one misconception is that the problem lies outside. So to think the actual problem lies inside. I created the karma for this by creating the action in the past, abused others in the past, so I hear abuse now. I've hurt others in the past, so I'm hurt now. I've left others in the past when we were in relationship. Now the arrow is coming back, it's hitting the target. So it takes the attention away from the misconception and develops some wisdom. Also recognizing that the other beings are not suitable to be harmed, just like us, in the same way that we would like to be forgiven and loved when something takes place. Another way of thinking is to develop the wisdom. So we can talk about ultimate wisdom, the wisdom that realizes that things do not exist the way they appear to us. We say the wisdom of emptiness, but here we can talk about the wisdom of impermanence. So this is very, very powerful. One sustaining factor of anger is that we find the situation intolerable, right? So like, we got to get rid of it. Smack the mosquito, cut the other person off, break the child's squirt gun who's just squirted us with water. I remember from my childhood, my dad tended to be quite strict. His father was from Russia, immigrant. So my father was the first, and generation, and his dad died when my dad was 13. 1929. My dad was born in 1916. And so he had to go out and support the family and work and so forth, and always was kind of resentful of the world in general. So when I remember once when my brother and I were in the basement of our house, and my dad was fixing something with a wrench or something, and we were squirting each other, and some of it squirted him, and he, out of anger, he took it and he smashed it with his wrench or his hammer, sort of like, to get rid of this. So here, what I'm talking about is impermanence, that this too will pass. You've heard that expression, some of you? It's kind of in a lot of different spiritual traditions. Dawn, have you heard that? Some other people nodded. So, Jean, have you heard that? This too will pass. So that is a statement of a kind of insight into impermanence that can help to cool off the mind. Think the mind, one factor that's exacerbating the anger is that this is going to remain unless I do something right now, right? Finding it intolerable. When I first went to the East, I was going to the East to teach in Beirut, Lebanon, before I got to Kopan and became a monk and everything. And I was teaching at an American community school in Beirut. And during that time, I had a friend who lived in the city. He was going to the university. He was an American boy, also American guy, and he had a predilection for hashish. And you know what hashish is, sort of the concentrated marijuana. And he experimented one Christmas time. He'd roll out the hashish in the thin sheets, put aluminum foil on either side, and put it in a Christmas card in an envelope and sent to people in the States to see if it would get through. And they all got it, I guess. So his thought then was to go big time. So he was making, with another friend of his, he was making cages for pigeons out of wood, laminated with layers of hashish, one layer of thin slice of wood, laths that you put the pigeons in, and then a layer of hashish, another layer of wood. And so he was planning to go big time. And I think the carpenter that they'd hired to make the cages told the police, and they raided his place, and he was put into prison, and I heard from, I think maybe his father told me, or someone told me, that he was in prison. He was a very good friend. And I immediately tried to get a lawyer for him, because you can imagine being in a Beirut prison. Anna, you're nodding. You can't imagine. This would be really bad. And I went down to see him the first time I could. It was like a day or two later. And you would go into this courtyard, and there would be bars where they would bring one prisoner after another if someone wanted to see them. So I could go up close, and I said, "Steve, how are you doing?" And he already looked like he'd been beaten. He's a very attractive. Pardon? Someone said something? It was in the background.
Sorry, Venerable. I think somebody unmuted by accident.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you. So I asked him, "Steve, how are you doing?" He already looked like he had been abused and maybe sexually molested, because he was like 23 or years old, very good looking, handsome guy. And he and I had read a lot of Sufi literature before, which we talked about. And one of the phrases in that was what he told me. He said, "This too will pass." So can you imagine the unhappiness and the anger that could arise if you're being abused? And this was something that brought solace to his mind, lack of, to diminish his anger and unhappiness, recognizing impermanence, that this too will pass. I found that very inspiring, and I would recommend that also as another antidote to your anger, that with the Kadampa Geshis, these great practitioners that had these 4 methods. So we talked about method of the arrow and the target, which is talking about karma, rather than blaming the outside, putting the blame on your own ego that created this karma in the past. A sense of compassion, that empathy for others, that they don't deserve your wrath, the wrath of George, the wrath of Shanka, whatever. And impermanence, this too will pass. So there's 3. So 4th one they proposed was to see the situation as your spiritual teacher. Actually, what we usually think of, one of the other exacerbating factors of anger, is that I don't need this. In fact, I remember that was another one of these phrases that I heard on TV when I first came back to the States after like a decade away. They say, I don't need, someone hassling you, and you say, you just leave them. You say, I don't need this, and you walk away. That's your line, right? Is there another way of saying that nowadays? What do people say? They still say that? I don't need this? David, what are you thinking? You have to unmute yourself.
I don't deserve this.
I don't deserve this, right? I don't deserve this. I don't need this. So instead of that, thinking, this is my teacher, this situation. This is teaching me about, developing patience and so forth, rather than thinking this is not something I need. This is actually my guru. Now you might think gurus are always, so kind, your guru is compassionate, loving. When you're in the presence of the guru, your spiritual teacher, nothing can go wrong. You're always loved and praised. But the real gurus are also, when they cultivate that, of course, but when the situation warrants, they point right to your ego, might say harsh words and so forth. They have that capacity also. So to recognize this situation that you find uncomfortable is teaching you about the nature of cyclic existence, samsara, our life in general, that it's the nature of suffering. It is teaching you that the fundamental cause of your problem is your own ego, is teaching you that this is an opportunity now to practice patience. This is actually, instead of thinking this is something I don't need, I don't deserve, thinking I need this. This is giving me the opportunity of practicing patience. There are many verses in the Tibetan teachings, the Indian teachings on training the mind, how to overcome what we say, transforming adverse conditions into conditions that make it conducive to practice the path. We say transforming adverse conditions into the path. So what that means is adverse condition here is something that's irritating to you, and thinking, I don't need this. I don't deserve this. I don't need this. Thinking, I need this because this is giving me the opportunity to practice patience. It's said that spiritual beings, bodhisattvas, for instance, will encounter someone who is irksome, who is like the bane of everyone's existence, that everyone else wants to avoid, someone who is problematic. I can think of some politicians like this, but I won't mention any names because you may like those politicians. I don't know. Someone who's, obsessed with their own ego, strikes out at others, harms the helpless, and so forth, you might think, I don't need this. Actually, this is giving you a chance to practice patience and compassion. So this is instead of thinking this is useless, I don't need this, thinking this is my guru. So Mr. or Mrs. iPhone has their hand up. What's
Hi, Churinoff. I was wondering if, how do I reconcile anger arsenal tool number 2 and number 4? Number 2 is, this person doesn't deserve my wrath, but number 4 is, actually, my wrath can be a good teaching tool for them.
No, that's not, it's not a good teaching tool for them. What I'm saying right now is that they are my guru. They are teaching me to be patient, not to be that my wrath would be good for them. They're giving me the opportunity of practicing patience. So it's said that, like in the 8 verses of the training of the mind, one, if I translate into English, I have which I recite every day, I've done for 40 years or something. When someone who I have benefited and in whom I have great hope or trust treats me unjustly, I practice to see them as my holy guru. So, especially if the situation is one in which the other individual has treated you unjustly, you didn't do anything wrong. And certainly if you have done something wrong, it gives you even more motivation not to get angry, because you even deserve it in a worldly sense. But if they seem to have treated you unjustly, which is usually a cause to generate anger and resentment, to recognize them as your guru, that this situation is not something that you don't need or you don't deserve. Certainly you deserve it from the point of view of karma, but you need from the point of view of practicing patience. It's said that I was just looking at the background, someone who's coming into Dawn's room. I lost my train of thought here. Yeah, so giving you the opportunity to practice patience. So the great bodhisattvas would sometimes go out of their way to make connection with individuals who were problematic, even though other people went out of their way to avoid them. So I'm not sure if if that satisfied the lady on the iPhone icon, but Barbara has her hand up also with a question, I think. Right,
Hello.
Barbara?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I'm a bit concerned with the first one. I mean, I understand. I don't think that what I'm going to say is exactly what you're saying, but I think that the turning it inward can then lead to one blaming oneself and turning all the anger inward, which then could lead to a sense of depression and despair.
Right. That's a
unless,
right. Yeah, good point. So here, when we talk about putting the blame, it's very, very important, because in Buddhism, when we talk about one of the quintessential verses of the training of the mind is another one is that place all blames on one thing, remember the kindness of others. So the blame doesn't mean you blame yourself. It means that recognizing, say, from our meditation on the mind, recognizing that the thoughts that arise in your mind, in this case, let's say anger, they are not yourself. you are not angry. Even you are not anger. Even though you might say, I am angry, you are not anger. We sometimes identify with various faults and qualities within our mind. We might think, oh, I'm smart. I'm, sort of inner quality of intelligence, or outer qualities. I'm rich. I am attractive. I am from the so-and-so clan. I am a McCormick, or I am a, whatever family you come from. So when there are faults within our mind, we sometimes identify with them also. Rather than developing pride, we develop a sense of inferiority, a sense of depression, and so forth. So in the same way, let's say these faults within our mind that we recognize in our meditation, they arise almost autonomously because we haven't trained our mind. We have seeds in our mind to give rise to anger and attachment. So the predisposition. And when the right situation comes, like when you water a seed and it's in the sunlight, in fertile soil, the right season and so forth, it will give rise to a sprout. When the right conditions are present, the seeds of anger and so forth and faulty states of mind can arise. So rather than identifying with them, recognizing them as artifacts within the spaciousness of our mind, rather than thinking, I am anger, you could just say, anger is present. So to deal with that, because you have you've come to recognize that anger is destructive. Like I said, you can still be strong, and I can't remember the word I'm trying to think of I've used before. You can be assertive and so forth, and not allow the situation to continue without getting angry. Anger is when you sense this discomfort and you try to place the blame somewhere, in the sense that it then exacerbates your sense of resentment till you want to strike out or say harsh words and so forth. You have to recognize the defects of anger. The kind of strategy in dealing with problematic minds is first to recognize the state of mind. First of all, you may not know that you're angry. You may not know that you may not recognize that you're under the influence of attachment, your own ego, and so forth. First, to recognize the defining characteristics. So anger is a state of mind that relies on something, a situation that you experience that is uncomfortable, suffering. Finding that more and more, because of these various exacerbating factors, like seeing it as permanent, seeing it as rising from the other person alone, seeing it as something you don't need at all, that cyclic existence should be a rose garden or whatever you call it, pleasure garden, so forth and so on. Seeing that the other person is suitable to be abused, that I'm somehow superior. All of these exacerbating factors then give rise to the intensification of that dissatisfaction, so that full-grown, full-fledged anger is there.
I guess I'm talking more about the blame part, though. So that if you take all of that and turn it on yourself, that's
right. So
any more.
Right. So that's why I said you don't identify with the anger. You see the anger. Okay.
I'm sorry.
You go.
Okay. because you keep talking about, not to look within, because it's not necessarily identifying with the anger. It's that I'm talking about the blaming part, I think.
Right.
And that instead of blaming someone or something out there, it sounds like you're saying you're blaming yourself.
No, you're not blaming yourself. You're blaming, first of all, the fact that there's anger in your mind and looking at what the cause of that anger was. In the Guru Puja, which I don't know if any of you do what we call Lama Chopo. There's a puja that's often done honoring the spiritual guides, the Buddha, of course, and manifestations as humans, our gurus and so forth. One of the verses in there, very, very powerful. Rangni Chepa Zimba Chongne Di Yidu Dugna Kepe Gurtongne. Having seen that the self-cherishing thought, the mind that considers ourselves more important than others, is the cause that gives rise to all undesired suffering. Lelan Dela Komdu Zunjete Agzin Dompa Donchen Jompa Jingilo. Please grant me blessings to destroy the great demon of egoism. So this is what you should be blaming. When I said, Lama said, first check inside, then check outside. The real cause of all of our suffering is our lack of empathy and our egoism. We say self-cherishing thought and self-grasping. So that is what, that is not you. When we said, while we're in cyclic existence, it's the nature to be suffering, right? But in the nature of our mind, there is no thought which is sort of the nature of our mind. There is no thought there's no thought that stains our mind. There's no defect that stains our mind so that it can't be removed, that it is the very nature of the mind. If you try to remove the green color from an emerald, you can't, it's no longer an emerald, right? The nature of our mind is unstained by the delusions. They arise due to the imprints in our mind which can eventually be removed in reliance upon outer conditions. A person saying harsh words, or you're being hit or whatever, losing your money or so forth. So that's where you should put the blame. This is very important when we do the practice called Tong Len, giving and taking. Taking on the suffering of others doesn't mean, being masochistic and, wanting to be harmed because you're a pile of excrement or something like that. I'm bad, I deserve this. Where you put the suffering, when you imagine taking it on, you put it on the self-cherishing thought, the thought of self-interest over others. And in so doing, you begin to erode that state of mind, that what we call self-cherishing thought, so that it can be eliminated. And the egoism, that's where you put the blame. Like I said before, if there was the Dalai Lama and the Buddha said, I said the Dalai Lama and the Buddha. So in the Buddhist scriptures, what you hear more commonly when the Dalai Lama says, if there's any object that is worthy of your wrath, your anger, your resentment, it's the egoism that arises within your mind, which is not you. It's just a defect of the mind that arises. That's when you see the real enemy. When you see that real enemy, instead of trying to defeat outer enemies, you try to defeat it. And that's where you can find real satisfaction.
Thank you.
Antideva, a great Buddhist saint, Indian saint, who wrote the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. Sometimes it's the entering into the way of the Bodhisattva, or I like sort of short name, the Bodhisattva's Handbook. You can say, nowadays we all sort of Bodhisattva for dummies, or Bodhisattva's Handbook or something. So in there he said, if you were to try to avoid the suffering of thorns and pebbles by covering the whole earth with leather, right? Or putting carpeting over the floor that has all these little pieces of wood sticking up or something. If you try to cover the whole world with leather to protect your feet from shards of broken pots and glass and thorns, you'd never finish. But by the simple implement of putting leather on the soles of your feet, putting on sandals, you can walk around without being harmed, right? So the same sense, you can't eliminate all enemies, by striking out, putting them in their place, People try to do that, right? Politicians and others, subduing the enemies and so forth. You'll never finish. There'll always be more enemies. But by the simple method of covering your own mind with the leather of compassion and overcoming the ego, and the self-cherishing, that you won't be harmed by them any longer, the outer ones, because you don't react in the same way. I don't know, Barbara, does that help a little bit?
Yes.
So you're not blaming, you don't take the suffering on yourself, you don't put the blame on yourself, you put the blame on that temporary, adventitious, that means a state of mind that arises due to conditions, anger and egoism and so forth, and its fundamental cause, which is cherishing oneself more than others and the self-grasping and so forth. That's where you put the blame, and that's where you put your spiritual work to eliminate it.
Thank you.
Okay. So we've reached the time limit. There's so many other things, but I think I'll give time for questions. So Kathleen, you were in the lineup there. I don't know if you were first.
Yeah, yes, I have a question about, you've talked a lot about anger, but what about grief as a source of unhappiness? Is that also self-cherishing?
Well, okay, so grief, oftentimes at the time of someone's passing away, we feel loss, right? This is, maybe you're talking about other grief, but this is one that often think of in the Buddhist scriptures. It talks about the various sufferings of cyclic existence. And one enumeration, it talks about the wailing and crying and the grief upon loss. It can be another person. In that case, if it's the other person, most of the time, one of the spiritual questions you have to ask is, are you feeling sorry or grief for the other person having lost their life? Or are you feeling sorry and grief for yourself because you've lost something? Generally, it's based on that kind of uncontrolled grief when, say, your partner or friend dies or leaves you or something, is based upon your own self-interest. So that has come about because of attachment. We're attached to our own happiness, our own, the pleasure that we derive from a relationship with another person. If you were to eliminate attachment from our relationships, mainly today we've just talked about anger, but if you were to be able to eliminate attachment from your relationships, you could still have, you could have more authentic, loving relationship with them if it's not based on attachment. Attachment, unlike anger, remember anger was something that experienced something unpleasant and exaggerated the unpleasantness of it and got to the point where you wanted to strike out. Attachment, similar kind of evolution, based on something which you find pleasant, exaggerating the qualities of that, and then wanting to keep it, not lose it. Maybe going out of our way to do things we wouldn't ordinarily do to make the other person happy or to keep that relationship. Attachment, say, anger is a little bit, the example that's given is a little bit like the waiter spilling, or you spilling salt on your table, salt and pepper on the white tablecloth. Very distracting and uncomfortable maybe, but the waiter can come by with their little broom and sweep it up. It can be eliminated. Anger, although it's the most destructive of the emotions, it can be short-lived. It can be eliminated from the mind if you're skillful, quickly. But it is the most destructive of all the states of mind because it not only does it create a negative karma, it burns up like a fire the virtuous karma that you've created in the past. You've done good things in the past, it kind of burns it up. Whereas attachment is like pouring olive oil under the white tablecloth. You know, you're in the restaurant, there's a big stain on the table. Now the person can't come up, the waiter can't come up and just sweep it off. It's embedded itself into the cloth. So attachment is more tenacious, long-lasting, and it can cause that kind of grief when someone leaves because of the dying, or they leave you, or other people are dying and so forth, because of your attachment to them. Now, a lack of attachment doesn't mean kind of like, you know, like cold-hearted, you know, they've died, so what? You know, a lack of attachment means still based, say, a loving relationship based not on attachment, but out of non-attachment, still loves and reveres and recognizes other sentient beings. You have a karmic relationship with them, and that you try to support them, and you work for their happiness rather than expecting them to make you happy. Attachment in relationships is like that. What was I saying? You scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. You know that expression?
Yes.
Yeah, sort of like expectation. So oftentimes we enter into relationships like, I find you pleasant. You seem to find me pleasant. So let's make a compact. Let's get engaged or married, or what is it we call, see each other exclusively, so that you can scratch my back and I will scratch yours in return. You know, I'll make you happy if you make me happy. The other person, our main goal is for myself to be happy, not so much my main goal is to make the other person happy. So if your main goal is in the relationship is pure love, wanting others to be happy, not based on attachment and expectation of something coming to you, there won't be grief when you lose what was making you happy. You know, that wasn't your main aim. It wasn't to make you happy. You find your happiness within. There's a lot more to say about that, but I don't want to go too much longer. Judy, you also have a question?
Yes.
Venerable, oh, I'm sorry, Judy. Venerable, you have till noon.
Oh, it's 1:30. Oh, I thought you had said you wanted to make it to 1:30.
Well,
Because
for a couple of weeks on, it'll be like that. Yes. But,
Oh, okay.
but
Okay.
today it's still
We had talked about that before. We said that often people didn't have the, you get kind of bored after an hour and a half. So if we had a little time, there's no problem. So we'll continue on. So Judy, what were you going to say?
Yes, so I'm totally on board with the idea of depriving anger of sustaining its energy and the methods. My problem is as far as making it a learning experience for myself. I don't want to give the power to someone to be my guru unless they are my guru. I have a better connection to it if it's situational. So I am going to keep my anger in check so I can learn from this particular experience. So it's around the person. Yeah.
Okay, let me see. It doesn't mean, generally what we want to think is that myself getting angry is not good. Why? Because it harms me in various ways, and eventually it can harm others if I strike out and so forth. But how does it harm me? So various ways. Immediately it harms me because we may we lose our reputation. Do you know anyone who you would say has a short fuse that other people's, they
Me.
they like to keep away from, they have a reputation of being angry, and we ourselves don't feel comfortable with them. So that's one of the faults of anger for ourself, manifest faults. Another is that if we don't restrain anger at all and we act out on it, we actually harm others. People have gone into wars and killed others. And so of course they harm themselves in so doing, but they harm others and so forth because of anger. Then on a more subtle level, we harm ourselves because when we get angry, we can't think properly. While that state of mind is there, it's one of the states of mind that the Buddha called klesha. Klesha, or in Tibetan we say yunmong, afflictions, delusions, right? So these are states of mind that generally, delusions in general cause the stability and quiet and calmness of the mind to be lost. And therefore, we don't really think in our best interests. We're sort of overcome by this. Some of the delusions are necessarily negative. They create negative karma, like the root delusions. Some of them are, well, not all of the root delusions. Like one of the delusions, prime delusions, is just ego grasping at our own ego and believing it. That is called a klesha, but it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily create negative karma, because under the influence of our ego, we create virtuous karma. We want to be happy. So we think, in future lives, I'm going to be born as a god because I'm, so that's still that ego grasping to it also causes our mind to be unclear, to prevent us from seeing things as they are. So that's one factor. But anger is like a double whammy. Not only does it do this, the next thing is the double whammy. It creates negative karma, which leaves an imprint in our mind to be abused and harmed in the future. Not only just reputationally, that other people will avoid us, or that someone will come and try to set fire to our trash can or burn our house down or shoot us in the street or something, but karma that will lead in future lifetimes to harm. And the propensity to get angry in future lifetimes very easily. It leaves the imprint of anger. The Dalai Lama, when talking to Richard Gere about things, he was asking Richard Gere about, taking on the role of someone else and so forth. And, like getting angry. Your person in the movie is the character that you're playing gets angry and so forth. And I think Richard Gere was asking something about that, and the Dalai Lama said, don't, what do they call it? Method acting. Don't actually get angry, because that's rehearsing anger. Some people think that there's no harm in that, but familiarizing yourself with anger so that it is present and you're feeding it and maybe even giving it reasons, like it's good. That is, makes it that much easier to get angry this lifetime and in future lifetimes. There's the seed of anger is being increased. But anger is like a double whammy here, because it also, not only does it create negative karma and these imprints to get angry in the future, it destroys the virtuous imprints within our own mind. We say the seeds of virtue, virtuous karma that we may have accumulated through kindness and generosity and patience and other things for a long period of time. One instant of anger, depending on who you get angry with, can destroy that or diminish the intensity of the virtuous karma, or put it off into the future, the ripening of that virtue. So if you were about to make some realizations in the spiritual path, sustained by virtuous karma on your mind stream, getting angry, that virtuous karma, the ripening of it, even if it's not destroyed completely, it can be put off, the ripening into the future, so that you don't make the realization now. So, it's a double whammy, double whammy. I don't know what they say nowadays. It not only it not only creates negative karma, but it destroys virtue. And there are few other negative states of mind that destroy virtue. One of them is abandoning the Dharma, abusing higher spiritual beings like bodhisattvas or gurus or Buddhas, that those also destroy the roots of virtue. But generally, anger is the most destructive that way. So it's not only like attachment creates negative karma. We might think that it's good because it gets me what I want. It gets me my chocolate chip ice cream or my pizza or my, because of attachment, I find friends, I'm attached to them, that brings me pleasure. That actually attachment creates negative karma, but it doesn't so much destroy virtue that you already have. But anger destroys the roots of virtue. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. So you have the same color hand as your skin tone, but the iPhone has a yellow colored hand. I was wondering the other day why some people have different emojis.
Yeah, choice, you have to go in and select the skin tone.
Oh, okay.
On Zoom.
So this
on the iPhone.
So iPhone, you have your hand up still. Do you have a question?
Yes. Hi, Venerable. I just want to clarify my question from last time.
Okay.
So I love the advice number 4 from the Kadampas, which is, welcome, see when you think other people are causing you disturbances, it's actually an opportunity to practice patience and all of that. I love that. And it's the reason why I love working in a big corporation. I just find it like, it's great when people check me, when people put me in my place, because it's great homework for me for practicing. So I love that. So I want to square that with advice number 2, which is have empathy for other people. And so don't, direct your anger towards them. I see so much value in other people putting me in my place that sometimes I can see other people who are in a place that I was in, like they're directing their anger towards me, for example. And I wonder if it's actually practicing empathy to kind of pull them to the side and say, hey, you know, like give them that same benefit of like, hey, perhaps your anger is coming from you, and kind of put them in their place in that way. I'm trying to square those two pieces of advice.
Good point. Yeah, so they're not contradictory. So for instance, bearing, preventing your own anger is good advice, but that doesn't preclude you from compassionately giving them advice, but that sometimes that one has to be very skillful. In this group, what do we have? 20, how many people? I can't see here, 35 or something. Many of you have come willingly. I hope none of you were forced to listen to this talk or participate. And Shankar, you didn't, okay. So you are a receptive audience to someone who in your corporation or in your office, for you to give, they didn't subscribe to your advice necessarily. So you have to be skillful. If they seem to be receptive and you have a good relationship with them, you can, go out, try to find some commonality without using spiritual or religious terminology if they are more worldly, or maybe calling on their spirituality if they're a Muslim or Christian or Jew or Buddhist or Baha'i or whatever else, what other religion they might practice. You can give some advice, but that's always, if it's not sought out from the other side. That's why generally in Buddhism, it's said that teachers generally do not teach unless requested, and even sometimes 3 times. As Shankar was joking the other day, he said, now I said it 3 times, please teach on Sunday, please teach on Sunday. So, but in general, you can teach when you, bodhisattvas and so forth can teach unbidden without being requested if they sense a need and they have some insight in the other person's mind and they recognize that their teaching can be beneficial. So that's the only caveat there. I would think that, in giving some advice, you'd have to be careful not to be giving something that is unsought and that they might feel is condescending, or that you are, you feel you're in a position to give them advice, especially if they found fault with you before they might think, I'm not going to take advice from you. You've got all of these things that I've been criticizing.
Thank you. I'll continue to zip it then.
You continue to zip it? You could keep talking if you want to know. Do you have some other? To colleagues who I can understand their, I've been there, so I can understand what they're feeling, and they did not seek my advice. For people who report into me, that I think there is a little bit more of a relationship where I can provide that unsolicited advice that, perhaps you're stepping out of bounds and you're proposing your opinion too strongly in a meeting, for example. But for other people, as you said, who haven't sought out any advice from me, then I'll continue to zip it. Thank you. Oh, I see. Zip it there. Okay. I thought you said you didn't want to ask any more questions because you were going to zip it for fear of talking too much right now. Okay. So let me say, and so we have a couple more minutes yet. So let me just mention a little bit of antidotes to deal with attachment. So although there are many deluded states of mind, problematic states of mind that cause us unhappiness, 2 of the most important are anger and attachment. the root of them is ignorance, but that's a program to eliminate ignorance is a program, an exercise that takes, because it's so fundamental, more effort. But let me just talk a little bit about attachment. So in the same sense, the methodology I talked about before with anger, anger is a state of mind that experiences something that's unpleasant, exaggerates the sense of unpleasantness, places blame somewhere and becomes uncontrolled and creates negative karma, even when restrained. If you're just angry and you don't act out, like teacher tells you, criticizes you in class and you have to smile, accept it. Still, having anger creates negative karma, even though you don't express it. It's kind of like the Jack in the Box, the toy little box you turn, and then at a certain point, the lid pops up and this little Jack comes out. What do they call that? They still call it Jack in the Box? So anger is like that, even though you repress it, it's going to come out sooner or later unless you apply an antidote. Attachment is a state of mind that's based on experiencing something that you find pleasant, exaggerating the qualities of that. Oh man, this car is nice. It's got leather cushion, or that boy is handsome and he's smart, or Brad Pitt, what was that? Richard Gere. Now I guess Richard Gere is old enough that people don't fantasize about him. I remember many years ago in San Francisco when I talked about Richard Gere. Oh no, it was in Japan when I was talking about. I said, meditate. Now imagine embracing Richard Gere. The reason I was talking about this was to talk about what's called changeable suffering. What we imagine as being pleasure, worldly pleasure, actually is of a dissatisfying nature. It eventually will change into suffering. So I imagine embracing Richard Gere, for 20 minutes, an hour, 5 hours, 24 hours. He starts to sweat, you start to sweat, the breath gets bad, it's no longer pleasurable. But anyway, when I was saying, imagine embracing Richard Gere, and someone said, I could hear from the back, this is in Japan. Someone's actually, so it may not be the perfect example any longer. It's like me, it's getting old. So pleasure, attachment is based on experiencing something that's pleasurable, exaggerating its qualities, and then as a result of that, not wanting, because it sinks into the mind, not wanting to separate from it. And if you are separated, because it's sort of sunk into your mind, it's like your heart is broken, right? We use that expression, broken heart. My heart it's like your heart is torn asunder. So it causes great problems. So how to deal with that? So when the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, the four things that are true for Arya beings, noble beings, that's kind of the etymology when we call the Four Noble Truths. It's not like the truths are themselves noble. Sometimes you could say they're ennobling, but they're said to be things that are obviously true for people, for individuals, superior beings, Aryas, who have seen reality as it is. So in that, the first noble truth, the truth of suffering, has 4 aspects. Suffering is suffering, obviously. Understand, it is impermanent, it is selfless and empty, and so forth. So here, this gives us a clue to antidotes to attachment. First of all, what we are attached to is samsaric pleasure, worldly pleasure. What we usually call pleasure and happiness and so forth. But it is this first aspect of the First Noble Truths is suffering is suffering. You might say, well, that's a no-brainer, or what's the word when you say define something by itself? You say that's what's that called when you define something by itself? Some grammatical term. Anyway, what it means is there are different kinds of suffering. There's obvious suffering, suffering of suffering, which everyone agrees, even insects and animals and so forth experience as unpleasant. And then there's a more subtle kind of suffering, which we call happiness, but is actually the nature of suffering. It's not real happiness. You know, embracing Richard Gere. If it were real happiness, the longer you embraced him, or Brad Pitt, or there are more ladies here than men, so I could use men as the examples of happiness. The more you had it, the happier you'd be. The richer you became, the happier you would be. You know, actually, the rich, if you know any people that are wealthy, they don't necessarily become happier the more wealthy they become. They become more worried about protecting it and so forth. And that becomes you know, they have to protect it. They have to hire bodyguards and so forth. So anyway, what we call of worldly happiness is no more than the reduction of one suffering, replacing it with another. And while the greater suffering is going down, the lesser suffering is still rising. While there's still that change, that the bigger suffering is going down, we call that relief or happiness. When the suffering that was rising to replace it becomes bigger, we start saying, suffering. So for instance, when you're hot in the sunshine outside, and you say, oh, let's go sit in the nice cool shade, have a glass of lemonade. And, you know, at first, when you sit in the shade, there's relief. There's some kind of happiness. Oh, this is nice. The suffering goes down. The suffering of the heat goes down, but the suffering of the cool goes up. And after some time, you might say, oh, let's get up and go in the nice warm sun, right? You know that expression, that kind of experience? You know, you attracted to, like me, eating ice cream, you know, oh, you and I, sometimes I make sure I don't buy the ice cream, but sometimes I bring it, oh, I'll just have it in the refrigerator in case, you know, and then, you know, put some in and start to eat. And at first the karmic cause of my desire for sugar or something, that begins to decrease the suffering, and I experience it as pleasure. But at a certain point, I'll have acid reflux that evening, I'll have indigestion, I get sort of the, you know, sugar jitters or whatever. So it is not the nature of happiness. It is actually of the nature of suffering. It's like Aryadeva, one of the great disciples of Nagarjuna, the great Buddhist saint, composed a text called the 400. The 400 stanzas on the yogic activities of bodhisattvas is called. The second chapter of that text, Shankar, do you know that text? 400?
I know the text, but I don't remember anything about the second chapter. But
well, the second chapter is considered to be the Buddhist, you know, detailed analysis of changeable suffering. So if you'd like to learn about that, there he's, you know, usually when we talk about changeable suffering, it sounds as though it's the happiness is some sort of suffering. Changeable suffering sounds like it's happiness at the beginning, but changes into suffering. But Aryadeva points out it's suffering from the very beginning. It's not real happiness. Say, for instance, if you have a toothache and it's suffering, and you take a strong pain reliever, at first you say, it feels so, that feels so, because the greater suffering is going down, the suffering of the toothache, and the suffering of the whatever your pain reliever is, your ibuprofen or whatever is going up. If you were to keep on thinking that that would always bring pleasure, so you're just sitting in a neutral state and say, well, I remember that was, ingesting the ibuprofen brought me pleasure when I had a toothache. Maybe it'll do the same now. If you take ibuprofen continually while you're in a neutral state, does that bring pleasure? No, it causes your liver to, all sorts of other problems. So it's not, samsaric happiness is not, is of the nature of suffering. We call it dukkha, dukkha. Dukkha means suffering, or you could call it, some people translate it as unsatisfactoriness, the truth of suffering. So all of the various kinds of suffering, especially samsaric happiness, are of the nature of suffering. So recognizing that alone, you can recognize that your exaggeration that this is really, that the thing that, your ice cream or your pizza or your cocaine or your sexual partner or whatever is actually a source of pleasure. It's not real pleasure. It's just exchanging one suffering for another. If we continue with these Sunday talks, because we're just about finished now, I can talk a little bit more of some of the other antidotes of attachment. But one of the thoughts, again, TV commercial, I remember many years ago, I don't know if they still make Schlitz beer. Do they still make Schlitz beer? Gene, you're in the Midwest. No, you don't know. There was some commercial, it's a sort of Milwaukee, one of those, Milwaukee is a big beer town. So there was one commercial, this old guy on a yacht. Dawn, you know this one? You look like you're smiling already. You know this commercial. And he's got all of these nubile young ladies in bikinis on his yacht with him. And the phrase is, you only live life once, so you have to grab as much gusto as you can. So he holds up the glass of Schlitz beer, the gusto. So go for it. That's what drives the world, isn't it? The desire for gusto, for pleasure, making money, becoming rich, becoming famous, becoming powerful, having pleasure of the senses and so forth. But from a Buddhist perspective, that's like a joke, you can find real happiness being with very few resources, being unknown, even reviled by others. In fact, many of the great saints of the past have been in situations like that. Milarepa was criticized, the great Tibetan saint who achieved enlightenment in one lifetime, criticized by his family and the others as living in a cave, not having anything, living off nettle soup. At that time, nettle soup was considered like the poor man's thing. Nowadays, you have to go to a health food store and pay a lot of money to have nettle soup, right? But anyway, at that time, emaciated, no clothes, just had one little loincloth, one pot to boil his nettle soup in. But he had achieved, total peace of mind. So I'll leave it there. And thank you all for coming to join us today. And welcome you back if you want to check. If those of you who've just joined in today, like Judy and Jean, I'd sent an invitation. There'll be some more of these, possibly some more of these Sunday talks in the future, if you'd like to do. And those of you, check the Thupten Norbu Ling website, the FPMT Center in New Mexico, in glorious Santa Fe. Were there many people from Santa Fe today? Who's from Santa Fe? Okay, yeah, less than half, okay. So let's do a little Okay, Ida, one last question before we leave. Ida has a hand up or comment.
No, I was just saying I'm from Santa Fe as well.
Oh, okay, that you were raising your hand that way. I see.
Yes, Venerable.
Thank you. So let's do a little dedication. We tried to make a little motivation at the beginning with the prayer and meditation to listen, to become a better person, to eventually become Buddha, to be able to help sentient beings. We've created some virtuous karma in the middle, listening, participating. Now dedicate those merits, which means making a strong wish or desire or dedication, as though you were to dedicate your income tax return to your nephew's college fund or something like this, or, you know, dedicate, we're going to put this money aside for that purpose. Here, dedicate the merits that they, whatever way they ripen in the future, which will necessarily be pleasant because of being virtuous karma, may it ripen in such a way that it enhances my spiritual practice. If I'm born attractive in the future, may it not become a cause of my pride, but may I use it to influence others beneficially in a spiritual sense. If I become wealthy, may I not become miserly, but may I use it to benefit other sentient beings. In whatever way this karma ripens, may it become the cause of enhancing my spiritual development, life by life, up to including the realization of renunciation, loving kindness and bodhicitta, and the wisdom that realizes the ultimate nature of phenomena, and achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings as a result of these merits. Thank you.